Evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. Um, so what I want to do, a couple things kind of as an introduction here. I want to give you previews of coming attractions, so to speak. I want to explain what we're going to do tonight and Bezrat Hashem next week and the one after that. Tonight, I hope to be able to get through the Soloveichik Dynasty, bring it to modern times to the 1980s, not the 1880s, the 1980s. We may or may not touch on Reb Shamsham Raphael Hirsch, the Rashar. We'll see. Even if I start him tonight, I won't finish it tonight. I'll go into next week. And Bezrat Hashem, next week we have, along with my teaching, we're also going to have a guest speaker about Rav Hirsch. I'm going to leave it nebulous as to what, who. I'll just say it's a direct descendant. That'll be next week. Then, as I said, we've gone through many personalities. We talked pretty much from the 1700s to the mid to late 1800s of personalities in the Hasidic world, in the Mitznaged world. Before that, of course, the whole section having to do with false messiahs. But what we haven't really done, and I was kind of building to this, is that after we finished with the Soloveichik lineage or story and Rav Hirsch, then I'm going to go back to the late 1700s and over into the early to mid 1800s. What was going on in Jewish history? Now, we see the personalities, and then what we're going to do is be able to learn about the history and pop these individuals, so to speak, in. It'll make more sense to understand what was going on at the time. When we talk about certain topics, kind of tangentially, when we learned about was Rabbi Yaakov Emden or anybody else, then we'll make more sense by putting them together. That's the derech, the path I'm hoping to go on the next over the next 2 or 3 weeks. Bezrat Hashem. So I want to start off with a picture. That's the only thing I'm going to share as far as the screen tonight, and then I'm going to take it off the screen share. Okay, we are talking tonight about a location known as Brisk in the Jewish world, Brest-Litovsk in the non-Jewish world. It borders Poland right here, part of Belarus. I'm talking about over here. I have that pink circle around it. As I've mentioned before, and we'll see especially when we get to Holocaust studies down the road, that many cities had one name, the quote non-Jewish name, and the Jews called it something else. You'll also notice up here is the city of Volozhin. Let me make it just a little bit bigger. Here's the city of Volozhin, which we learned about recently, Chaim Volozhin. And the reason I'm mentioning is because we're going to see it's going to be part of the journey in the Soloveichik family. Here's Volozhin. Here's Brest, which is modern day Belarus, before known as Brest-Litovsk. There was also a famous treaty known as the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, which we may or may not talk about one day. And it's known in the Hebrew, in the Jewish world, as Brisk, B-R-I-S-K. I will also mention that I had the pleasure, honor, I'm not sure what the right words are, to have been in yeshiva in Chicago, the time period of Rav Aaron Soloveichik. I'm not going to be discussing him, so I'm just going to mention one brief story that I want to tell you. We haven't even really gotten into the Soloveichik dynasty, but we all know the name. So Rav Aaron, who was actually offered the position that eventually his brother, Rav Yosef Dov Halevi Soloveichik, known as the Rav, was in Boston, and then eventually Yeshiva University. So he was the Rosh Yeshiva in Yeshiva that I went to in Skokie in Chicago. Skokie is a suburb of Chicago. And when I started as a freshman in 9th grade, he was already, he was really a heavy hitter, and he was the Rosh Yeshiva. As my puny little 13-year-old brain, he's like, there's God and my parents, and then there was him. That's how I kind of looked at it. And I was coming around a curve, I was not coming around, I was running down the hall and started to make a left turn. And here comes Rav Aaron with, I can't really show you on the video, he had about 6 or 7 svarim stacked up under his arm. I went smack into him. He went flying. The books went everywhere. And I was laying there saying, okay, God, here it comes. Bring down the lightning bolt. I mean, I really thought it was over. That's how much admiration I had for maybe awe would be the right word. There's all kinds of unfortunate, massive political problems that happened the following year, which I'll not get into, maybe privately if you want to know, that we lived through. which is pretty sad. However, I won't be talking about him, so I wanted to at least mention that name. Now, I have to laugh at myself. That was one. That was the second reason to laugh at myself. We're about to talk about a series of men who were not just geniuses, not just Talmidei Chachamim, but who really changed the face of the way Torah is learned by certain people, changed the importance of the Rambam. He was ready. The Rambam was extremely famous and important and everything, but it changed the whole character of the Rambam. Minds that most of us can't even begin to fathom. And about 2 hours ago, I had a conversation with somebody who's not religious. He wants to be maybe a little bit more religious. And I mentioned, you could always go on YouTube if you want to start looking at some of my classes. He was interested maybe in Mesilat Yesharim. So you'll go and take a look at something. Until I realized I forgot, I never got around to making playlists, which means like all the classes on Navi and all the classes on Mesilat Yesharim, et cetera, all bunched together. I looked in that last year, 2 years ago, how to do it. I was too lazy. I watched a video today, about 2-3 hours ago, and I saw how easy it was. So I already did like all the Kuzari ones and all the Navi ones. I'm proud of myself. And here I'm going to come sit down and talk about these geniuses. Like I felt like, wow, I was so smart, be able to put together a little playlist on YouTube. And it's like, it's a zero. Mamasha zero. But okay, in any case, let's talk about the Soloveichik Dynasty. Let me take this off of my screen so I don't have the map in front of me. Get this set up. Okay. We're going to start off with a man who was known as we've seen many times, a person is known by the name of the Sefer, the most well-known Sefer, a book that they've written. In this case, we're going to talk about the Beis Halevi. You cannot say Bet Halevi. Even in the Sfaradi world, it's called the Beis Halevi, which means the house of the Levite, who was Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveichik. Yes, it's the same name of the man who becomes known as the Rav in the United States. Same name, but we're going to start with him. He is known, like I say, Rabbi Yosef Dov Halevi Soloveichik, the original recipe, born in 1820. This is the time period we're going to deal with tonight is pretty much 1820 to about 1980, 86, somewhere around there. He's born in 1820 in Belarus. He's already born into a family known as the Rappaport rabbinic line that was already very established and very well known in the rabbinic circles. As we've seen over and over the story that keeps repeating itself, very often these geniuses or very smart, well-known individuals have grown up almost in an incubator that encouraged this type of genius. And I don't throw that word around lightly at all. He started off studying in Volozhin. We learned about Volozhin a couple of classes ago. Chaim Volozhin, who was the established but became the mother of all yeshivot, the Lithuanian style yeshivot that we in our minds think about when we think of a yeshiva. So that's where he started, in that yeshiva where you saw on the map. It was all the way on the north, towards the northeast of the country. And now he eventually, which we'll see shortly, he moves southwest. His brilliance was evident early on, like many others, and he developed a reputation not just for brilliance, which we've seen time and time again with other people we've learned about, but with his ability to analyze and use his intellect to drill down well below the surface of anything that people were learning till that point. And the truth is that at an early age, he pretty much lived in obscurity. He was offered a position at Volozhin when he was still there, but there were some tensions that were between him and the Netziv. Unfortunately, and I really do mean unfortunately, I don't want to put quotes on it, the Soloveichik family very often found themselves at loggerheads with community, with other leaders and all. It's just that once you're in the derech of the Soloveichik way, then that's your derech. Doesn't mean that they weren't open to other ideas and all, but just in general terms, it seems to have had come across some issues. And he had bumped heads with a man named the Netziv, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, who, again, I'm not going to get it. If I talk about every single Gadol B'Yisrael, we would be here for 25 years, and we wouldn't really be doing history, just be doing biographies. And that's not the point here. And he was his cousin by marriage. And because of this headbutting, he decides he's not going to stay in Volozhin. He's not going to study. He's not going to take any position there as a Rav or anything. He originally rejected pretty much every offer because it starts to get a little bit of reputation on taking any rabbinic post because he wanted to sit and learn. That was his goal. In addition to that, he even expressed part of the reason he didn't want to take a position is he wanted to maintain this sense of integrity, to avoid getting entangled in community politics. He felt that if he had that burden of communal responsibility, that it would drag him down. It would make him take away from his learning. And thank God, I can say parenthetically, that the 10 years I spent officially as a shul rabbi, the amount of political problems I ran into, thank God, were very, very few. Learned a lot of good lessons along the way. But I digress. So let's go back. He was appointed the Rav of the city of Slutsk, which, if you're interested, you could look up some history about it. But then he which becomes the most important part of this beginning of this story, he becomes the Rav of the city of Brisk, a name that will forever be synonymous with the name Soloveichik. He combined his rabbi leadership with strong halachic decision-making. And it wasn't just kosher, treif, mutar, asur, it's okay, it's not okay. There was clarity, there was deep insight into the questions he was handed, and a sense of independence. He saw himself as a person who was able to think and not to have, he took into consideration other halacha, of course, but not to be, say that he has to fall in line with everybody else, which is rare. When you find, unfortunately, in some of the parts of the rabbinic world, you'll find a need, depending whether you're talking the Lithuanian kind of community or the Hasidic world or the non-Lithuanian world, where sometimes leadership just wants to follow in lockstep. We've seen it, unfortunately, here in Israel in recent things having to do with politics. But let's talk about what is his jumping off point. What is the turning point here of who he becomes as the Beis HaLevi? He writes a commentary on the Rambam. And in this commentary, it's not just a commentary on the Rambam. It's a brand new way of thinking. How he looks at halacha as not just a body of laws, but rather it's a system of logical structures, things that are able to be combined with each other and to build one onto another. The Beis HaLevi himself does not fully develop what will become known as the Brisker Derech, or the way of Brisk, which we'll see in a few minutes what that becomes and who does that. But he's already planting the seeds for that future approach to Torah, such as he would ask not what the halacha is, but what is the conceptual framework. I'm not going to give you an example. I'll give you some examples on some of these things, but not everything, because we will be here really all night, because it's so much and so deep. And he used the Rambam's formulations and way he had psikat halacha, how he paskin, how he decided halacha, as a launching point to understand the architecture of halacha categories. If you take the whole category, for example, of matanot kuhuna, the giving presents in quotes to the kohanim, whether it's truma or parts of the animal after korban, and be able to use that framework and apply similar ideas elsewhere, and to build from column A, take something from column B, combine them, and see that there's a structure that follows throughout. His son, Rav Chaim Soloveichik, would eventually crystallize this method into this revolution that becomes the Brisker method, the Brisker Derech. So let's talk about him for a minute. So remember, Rav Yosef Dov Levi Soloveichik, the original one, born in 1820, he starts the early stages of planting the seeds of what will become the Brisker Derech. Along comes his son, the Rav Chaim Soloveichik, born in 1853, because it's important for the dates just to kind of get a picture in your mind where we're talking about. He dies in 1918. So it's not like he's 2,000 years ago. He's relatively, historically, is still very recent. So I say, if the Beis HaLevi was the foundation of the Brisker method, the Brisker derech, then Rav Chaim Soloveichik, who becomes known as Rav Chaim Brisker, just like we've seen before, Rav Chaim Volozhiner, they take the ER and add it, so to speak, to the end of the city and make it as like the one from. So Rav Chaim Brisker means the Rav Chaim from Brisk. So I guess I'd be, Zev Chicago, or, it doesn't make me a Rebbe, but it just means it's just, anyways. So Rav Chaim Brisker builds the building. If his father lays the foundation, he builds the house on top of the foundation. Let's talk a little bit about who he was. And then what was it that was so different about his approach to Torah? He marries into the family of the Nitziv. I mentioned that name before, that by relative by marriage was the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva in Volozhin. People who would come into his shiur, when he was teaching, felt that they had entered a different dimension. This is where you cue Rod Serling. It was a different world, a different way of learning, and he himself became the posek, the decider of halacha, the leader, the trailblazer, pretty much across the board of the Lithuanian Jewish world, not just in Belarus and not just in wherever he was, but pretty much across the Lithuanian world. So let's define. Now, I am not a Brisker. That some people would consider a failure in me, maybe. It's not. I don't have the approach of a Brisker. But as I said in the week before, some of my best friends are Briskers. That's very nice. What is the Brisker derech? What does that mean? So I'm going to give you, to the best of my ability, some of the ideas of what Brisk is about and what he has taught, Chaim Brisker, and we'll get a couple of examples. First thing's called chakira. Chakira, the best way I can explain that in English would be conceptual analysis. That every halachic issue can be broken down into two or more models. Let's take an example. The mitzvah of tefillin. Is it when a man puts on tefillin, is he being mekayim a mitzvah, or is it a form of avodah, a form of service of Hashem, independent of mitzvah categories? Again, this is an example, and you say, "What do you mean? It's a mitzvah. It says it right in the Torah." Okay, I can't start getting to all this. When it comes to tuma, something that is ritually impure, is it? Here's probably one of the most famous. Well, if someone hears anything about the Brisker derech, if they know even a little bit, it's the next two words: chefza and gavra. Chefza means an object. Gavra means the person. So, for example, in the laws of Tuma, something is ritually impure. Is the chefza itself, the item itself, is it impure? Or is it that the gavra is ritually unable to touch this item? That may not be a good example, so I'll give you a better example. Let's talk about Kiddush. Kiddush Friday night. Is Kiddush a chefza shel mitzvah? Meaning, is the actual kos, the cup of wine or grape juice, is it itself have a level of kedusha? That's the chefza, the object, or is it the gavra? Is what's important is the personal of God, the chiyuv, the requirement, the obligation of the person. So what does this mean? So he said like this: there is no requirement to produce an object of kiddush. There's no requirement to have a kos, a special kos. That's the chefza. But there's a personal obligation. The gavra has to verbally acknowledge the sanctity of Shabbat. And we can prove that it's a gavra requirement, person, and not a chefza, not a thing. How? I go to somebody's house Friday night, the person makes kiddush, and I don't make kiddush, I don't drink anything, I say amen, I'm yotzei, which means the mitzvah is on me, the gavra, the gever, the person, and not so much the object. The object is there in order to facilitate the gavra being able to do the mitzvah and fulfill his obligation. Another example, which is not a chefza gavra thing that I can think of, maybe it is something called the hechsher mitzvah. There is no mitzvah in the Torah to build a sukkah. What do you tell me? We have a mitzvah. You got to sit in the sukkah for 7 days, right? There's a mitzvah. No. The mitzvah is to sit in the sukkah. The building of the sukkah is called a hechsher mitzvah. It enables you to do the mitzvah. You have no chiyuv to buy a house that has doorways that require mezuzah. But if you do, then it's called a mitzvah kiyumit. You're now in a situation where you have to do the mitzvah. So now you have to do that. I'm just throwing out concepts here just to understand that we look at everything. Many people look at all the mitzvot as, okay, it's a mitzvah. You do this mitzvah, you do this mitzvah, you do this mitzvah. But we have to understand also that there are many, I'm literally scratching the surface here, and that's it. Many levels and sub-levels to each mitzvah. And the difference between it being a cheftza or the gavra, the object that's important, or the person that's important has the chiyuv, will make a major difference in the way either a mitzvah plays out or when a person is maybe exempt from a mitzvah. That's one possibility. There's also something called siman and siba. Again, I'm just telling you the best of my research abilities here. I am not well-versed 100% in the Brisk method, so I'm giving you what I've learned. I'll give you one example. Siman means a sign. Siba means a cause or a reason. A siman is a visible sign or an indication that something's wrong. It's a characteristic. For example, if you are careful to eat what's called it's actually Yiddish, glatt, Hebrew called chalak. That means it's smooth. What's smooth about it? It's not the animal's face. The lung of the animal has 3 lobes on one side and 2 lobes on the other side. Between the lobes, sometimes there could be a puncture in a lobe that creates what's called a sircha. A sircha is an adhesion that makes like a little bit of pus or something that connects the 2 lobes. If it's easily removed, according to Ashkenazim, and it's still smooth, it's fine. Sfaradim, you can't try to get it off and hope it's smooth. It's either it's smooth or it's not smooth, black and white. Okay? Question is, what happens if you find a scar? The shochet is the one area of an animal that has to be checked, both while it's in the animal and outside the animal, is specifically the lungs that's most problematic. The scar itself is not the reason. Let's say you find a scar on one of these lobes. The scar itself is not the reason for the disqualification. It's a siman. It's a sign that there's something wrong. What's the wrong? That maybe there was a puncture, and the puncture in a lung disqualifies the animal from being kosher. So the siba, the reason the animal may not be acceptable, is the hole, which was there before the scar. The siman, the sign that it was a problem, is the scar. Now you say, like, oh, give me a break. Come on. And I thought that was bad enough what the rabbis did. Now they're going down to this level. It's actually up, not down. But this was the way the mind worked in the Soloveichik, works to this day in the Soloveichik. Some of you may know Rabbi Chaim Soloveichik was a renowned speaker, just one after another. I'm actually friends, haven't spoken in many years, but when I was in Chicago, very close friends with Rabbi Moshe Soloveichik, which was Rabbi Aaron's Alav Hashem. Rabbi Moshe, he should live and be well. One of his sons, I think it was his oldest. I once asked, whenever I needed like a really, really powerful Dvar Torah, I would call Rabbi Moshe on the phone. I say, I need something. Without blinking an eye, he'd give me something. I asked him one time, I may have told the story. I asked him one time, is it true? He had a small shul, has a small shul in Chicago. Is it true? They told me that on Shabbat morning, when you go up to give your drasha, to give your speech, that as you're walking up, you're thinking about what you're going to say. He says, no, that's not true. I think about it once I get up there. It's like a flow of just genius. Again, it's just, and it runs in the family. Baruch Hashem. In any case, these are not just word games. Siman and Siba, Cheftza and Gavra, what they allow for a different level of clarity. Why is that important? Because let's assume for a moment, I'm not going to make up a case. Just say there's a case where if it's a Siman for something, then we work one way. We have to find a Siba. We have to find the reason that something's not okay. But if it's a Cheftza Gavra thing, we have to decide, is the Gavra, the person himself, not required to do it? It gives a different approach to applying halacha, not just understanding, but putting it into application. These aren't just theoreticals. But the central role of the Rambam was elevated by Rav Chaim. It started with his father, It started with Rav Yosef Dov, moved into his son, the Brisker Rav, who elevated the Mishnah Torah. His father started it. He elevated the Torah to make it not just the ideal code of law. Remember, if we remember our history, which we did the Rambam many, many months ago, remember that the Rambam was the first, yes, the Rif also codified Jewish law, but not to the same extent that the Rambam did. It was the first codification of Jewish law from the time we got the Torah on Har Sinai. We're talking the 1200s. You're talking about a couple thousand to 2,500 years more without a code of Jewish law, anything remotely like that. The difference between the Rambam and everything that came before him is by the Rambam, you could see literally chapter and verse. You could see a topic, Hilchot Sukkah. You can see, how to build a sukkah, what makes a sukkah not okay, when you patur, you exempt from the sukkah. So Reb Chaim didn't just see this as a book of laws. He saw it as a starting point. It was structured, it was orderly, it was rigorous. His chidushim on the Rambam were written after he passed away. And I am not a math person, but I understand from people who are mathematicians that the way the book on the Rambam was written is very much like proofs. Like I remember I hated my geometry teacher. Like you learn proofs, angle, 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 side, 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 at least something stuck in the brain. Conceptual, precise, beautiful. The way he would take concepts, move them from something maybe unclear, which is unusual for the Rambam, because more with the Rambam, it's not that it's not clear. It's like, why does the Rambam say this word here? And over there, he says this word. Why does the Rambam include this topic under this heading? To such an extent, and you learn so much from when you do even a little bit of that type of learning. I'm making this up now. Okay, this doesn't exist. Why would it be that in the halachot of tshuva, of repentance, there's a paragraph in there about how to search for chametz? It doesn't exist. I'm making that up. I'm like ChatGPT right now. I'm making up sources. So it's so out of place. So in the Brisker way, they would try to explain what is there, what's the connection. By the way, this happens a lot. Also, he may have a similar halacha in one of the books, in one book in the Rambam, and another halacha very similar elsewhere, and the word changes, literally one word. Why? Why did he change that one word? Again, you was like, give me a break. It's a word. Nah, the Rambam was no such thing, and the Brisker eyes looking at the Rambam, it's much more than that. Rav Chaim believed that being vague was a sin. What does that mean? If something is not fully understood, that means the student needs to redefine the question. The teacher needs to try to answer it better to the point where the student and the Rebbe or the book, the Sefer, finally click and it's understood. He demanded clarity, not only from texts, but from himself and his students. That Brisker method spread to cities that names in Europe and in the United States and in Israel. Slobodka, Mir, Kletsk, Radin is where the Chavetz Chaim was, Telz, Lakewood. They're yeshivot, and there's also yeshivat Brisk around the world that are direct descendants of two parts: the yeshiva framework from Volozhin and the Brisker approach that combined to bring that down. I said Reb Chaim Brisker. He wasn't the Brisker Rav. The next one, his son, Reb Chaim's son, becomes known as the Brisker Rav. So I want to correct that. Reb Chaim's just known as the Reb Chaim Brisker. The Brisker Rav is Rav Yitzchak Zev Soloveichik. He inherits his father's brilliance. He inherits his father's rigorous approach to halacha, understanding Torah, and especially the Rambam. He escaped the Holocaust. He was born in 1886 and lived to 1959. He escaped the Holocaust and eventually arrives in Yerushalayim in 1940. And he establishes Yeshivat Brisk on a street in Yerushalayim to continue his father's tradition. He, the Brisker Rav, was known for his tremendous yirat shamayim, his being in awe and fear of Hashem, but awe is a much better term in this particular case. He was concerned about even the smallest error in halacha. When a person is in a position of deciding things for others, whether it's a shul rabbi, or it's a rebbe, or it's someone who's gadol b'Yisrael, the biggest fear is making a mistake and causing someone to do something wrong. I thank God I get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of questions, person and WhatsApps and all, and each one of them is an opportunity to really make a mistake. And unless it's something black and white, I want to look it up. I want to double check myself because, the guy who can't put together a playlist without watching a YouTube how to do it, In any case, here you're talking about, not Zev Shamli, you're talking about a gadol b'Yisrael, okay? Because he was so concerned about not wanting to make a mistake and not wanting people to make a mistake, one of the things he was known for within the Soloveichik family in general also was chumrah, or stringency. It's a chumrah. Not out of extremism, not because, the rabbi said it's this, but we're going to be more extreme just to be extreme. No, he felt that it was because a meticulous commitment to halacha required to the nth degree. He didn't publish extensively, and we're talking about the Brisk Rav now, but his sons did put together a multi-volume work. I used to have some of it. I don't have it now. Called Chidushe Maran HaGriz. Griz is Hagom Reb Yosef Zev. Maran means our teacher. Interesting enough, as a side point, when Sfaradim referred to Rav Yosef Karo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, he is called Maran, our teacher. When they referred to the Ramah, the Ashkenazi posek in the Shulchan Aruch, they say Maram, their teacher. So he's known as Maran Hagriz, and within there, he sometimes will do something to the effect of quoting dozens of citations in the Rambam to build up to just one chakira, to one point that he's trying to make, that then when it's looked at in reverse, or you say, play the tape back now, everything falls into place. You have to have a certain mindset to be able to do that. You have to be able, there's a Yiddish expression, those I don't pretty much care for Yiddish, but I will use it when necessary. Halt cup. Halt cup literally means to hold your head or hold the head. Means that when you go through all these things in let's say just one of his simanim, one of his writings in the Griz, and he's going to this Rambam and this Rambam and this Rambam, and he's going, and where's he going with all this? And he's quoting things that may not even have the same topic. And then when he gets to the end, ties it up with a nice, neat little bow, that the Brisker method, that every single thing that he's quoted now falls into place. And now you go, now I get it. And it could take hours and hours and hours and hours to get through it. His authority was so great that other Gedolim in his time would defer to him when it came to psak, when it came to deciding halacha, especially when it came to public policy or ideology, when it was intersecting with halacha. He was a man who knew the world. Probably in modern times, there are a handful of individuals, a handful of people in the rabbinic world who have truly transformed modern Judaism. First one that comes to mind, of course, Lubavitcher Rebbe, Zecher Tzadik L'Kadosh Livracha. I had a discussion with somebody yesterday. Who's not Jewish, discussing something online, and the topic happened to be, for whatever reason, happened to be Chabad. I was trying to have him understand what was unique about Chabad relative to the other ways of Orthodox Judaism. And we talked for just a few minutes about that particular topic, and I said, this Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who we have not yet learned about, but he was the last Lubavitcher Rebbe, without a doubt, had more influence around the world to world Jewry than probably anybody else since Moshe Rabbeinu, and possibly more than the Rambam, because of what he's been able to accomplish, to put a home for Jews almost in every corner of the world. So you had him. Rav Yosef Dov Levi Soloveichik is one of those people, and there's others, but I'm just going to talk about him for a few minutes. In the United States, he's known as the Rav. um, to distinguish it from the United States, calling some the Rebbe. The Rebbe is the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Rav is Rav Yosef Dov Halevi Soloveichik. He was the grandson of Rav Chaim Soloveichik and the son of Rav Moshe Soloveichik. He is born in Pruzhany. He learns in Berlin, where he earns a doctorate in philosophy. At the same time that he is studying in Berlin, he's also immersed in Torah. He has two tracks going in his brain at the same time: the secular world and the Torah world. And he said, like, wait a minute, choose one or the other. So if you are catching on quickly, you'll understand where this is going with this idea. He in 1932, he moves to Boston, eventually to New York, and where he becomes the Rosh Yeshiva of RIETS, Yeshiva University, Yitzchak Yochanan Theological Seminary, succeeding his father. That's like a thumbnail sketch of his life. That's like saying, tell me everything you know about Torah. It's like, okay, here's Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Okay, that's it. Have a nice day. The Brisker method came to America, but not just the halachic categories, the halachic approach, but also philosophical approaches. The Rav was a prolific writer. He wrote books that some of you have on your shelves: The Halachic Man, The Lowly Man of Faith, where he analyzed things that had been looked at prior generations in a different way, but he looked at through almost a religious psyche, through halachic approach, combining psychology and halacha and emunah and faith and all types of things that were, I don't know. I don't know enough to tell you that, it's unique. There's nothing like that. But he still remained uncompromising when it came to his brilliance in shiurim. Some of his shiurim would last literally for hours. Many of your friends, of your contemporaries, and some of you who are listening now or will hear this on YouTube, learned under the Rav. What's interesting is that in the United States, I have not been to all these yeshivot in the United States, obviously, but I would bet that the vast majority, I'm talking a very large percentage of yeshivot, have some of the works of Rav Soloveichik, of the Soloveichik family, whether it's the Chidushei Agris or the writings of the Rav, and very few percentage have Rav Kook. Come to Israel, and it's Rav Kook. Everywhere it's Rav Kook. We'll obviously have to deal with him when we talk about the 1900s, 1900s. It was just his yard site, by the way. For some reason, I remember his yard site's the third day. Sorry, it's not just. It's going to be the Gimel Elul is his yard site coming up. So in Israel, the Maran Harav Kook, he is known by many in the Dati Leumi world as Maran Harav Kook, our teacher, our rabbi. In the United States, it's the Rav. And I can tell you honestly that in the shul where I was, in our library, I hate to say it, I don't know if we had a single book of Rav Kook. In my personal library at home, I may have had one thing, I don't remember, and a few things Rav Soloveichik. I wasn't a Talmud of Rav Soloveichik. I know, could start throwing the stones now. I never walked into Yeshiva University. I have a t-shirt from there. I walked past Yeshiva University and all I have is this lousy t-shirt. But that's the way it is. It was just that the mindset. It was the United States is the Rav, and we come here, it's Rav Kook. And I started buying Rav Kook, as far as they're known as cookbooks. And I actually understood a few words of Rav Kook. When he talks about halacha, Rav Kook is fairly understandable. When he's talking philosophical things, you need someone to explain. I mean, unless you're really, really, really good. It's not just because the Hebrew is a very high level. That's one thing. But in one sentence, he could be giving you a tremendous amount of information. So the truth is that Rav Soloveichik was known as the de facto leader of the so-called quote-unquote modern Orthodox community in the United States. He advocated for higher education in secular stuff, Zionism, which was became a Zionist at some point in his life. He was not always, and communal engagement, while still again pressing on with the idea of full allegiance to halacha. This gave birth to something that really starts with the next person we'll talk about next week, Rav Hirsch, the concept of Torah Umada. Torah Umada, which literally means Torah and knowledge or science, or it's debatable. But taking the Torah world and the secular world and combining them so that even things that are non-Jewish ideas per se, or non-Jewish things, physics in and of itself is not Jewish. Plenty of billions of people non-Jewish learn physics, but because it can work into the Torah world, how to incorporate that. For those of you who, of course, knew Rav Rabinovich, the Rosh Hashiva here at Birkat Moshe, you can see some of his works. He had doctorates in, I believe, electrical engineering, whatever. You look at some of the things he wrote, Shuvas, Responsa he wrote, and the detail and the drawings, like it's amazing. Taking things that are in the secular world, I shouldn't say secular, things that are not necessarily Torah based idea or thing. Everything's Torah based. I'm contradicting myself, but I'm saying, I hope you understand what I'm saying. It's not Chamisha Chumshei Torah, it's not Tanakh, it's physics. But then meshing them together, this concept was not radical by the time that Rav Yosef Dov Alevi Soloveichik comes around, because it's really born with Rasha, Rav Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, who we will talk about next week. So I just want to kind of recap a couple things. The Brisker Derech really reshaped the Beit Midrash. Even people who are not Briskers, true Briskers, will learn the Torah of the Rav Chaim, we'll learn the Grees, we'll learn certain of their Svarim, we'll learn the Beis Halevi, and will be used in Shabbos HaGadol and Shabbos Shuvah Drashas for centuries, for sure. They also are there, someone like Rav Soloveichik, Rav Yosef Dov, trained generations to think in clear conceptual terms, being true to yourself, precision in halacha, respect for the structure of Torah. Rav Chaim defined a model. Rav Chaim Brisker defined the model of what a Rosh Hashiva and a posek and a thinker is. The Brisker Rav was the one who held on to tradition and made sure that it was parsed properly with all of the Brisker approaches. And Rav Soloveichik, known as halachic man, the philosopher leader in the modern world. It is, without a doubt, easy to talk for weeks about the lineage and the people of Brisk. I only talked about, in the Soloveichik family, talked about 3 people. But there are many others, other branches that are, as you move yourself out. For those of you who are familiar, of course, with the Yeshiva in Gush Etzion, Yeshiva Torah Zion, Rav Lichtenstein, who's married to Soloveichik, the whole, it's an amazing family. It truly is. But like every family, I'm sure they had their bumps and bruises and interesting family Thanksgiving meals. And I say specifically Thanksgiving because I gave a shiur many years ago on the topic of Thanksgiving. And it was known that the Rav would give his shiur a little bit earlier in the day so he can go home and have Thanksgiving with his family, believing that it was a day of Hodu Lashem Ki Tov, and it was not just an American tradition. I know there are others who say, give me a break. It was a religious thing, but it doesn't make a difference. He was not afraid to say something like that, to do something like that. Okay, so we're going to stop here. Next week, Bezrat Hashem. Let me just double check, but I believe we should be okay. Yeah. So next week, Bezrat Hashem, we will learn about Samson Raphael Hirsch, known as Shamshon Raphael Hirsch. We'll get some insight into who he was, his fight, almost literally his fight against the birth of Reform Judaism and the Haskalah movement, the Jewish Enlightenment and changes, of which he was one of the main opponents. And then, like I say, we have a guest speaker who will share some anecdotes, Bezrat Hashem, about him, a direct descendant. And then we will backtrack and go back to the actual history of the time period. Okay. I wish you all a wonderful evening. Thank you for being here. And share some Bezrat Tovot.
Thank you very much.
Very welcome, everybody.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you.